The issues surrounding plagiarism can often be confusing and misunderstood, possibly resulting in fear, frustration, or confusion for students. This seminar, to your credit, using the words and ideas of others correctly, is intended to address your questions and your concerns regarding plagiarism and academic integrity. If we don't integrate our sources appropriately, we may get ourselves in trouble. Let's consider how to summarize and paraphrase correctly. When we use the words and ideas of others, there's three primary ways that we integrate those into our own work. We can either summarize a passage in our own words, we can paraphrase a passage in our own words, or you can use quotations of the exact words of the authors. So I want to focus a little bit on two of those, summarizing and paraphrasing, and how they can be problematic if we're not careful in regards to using those sources. We might end up with problems with plagiarizing. So in summarizing, I don't want to teach you how to summarize right now. What I do want to talk about is the nature of a summary and how we can use that effectively. So a summary should accurately reflect the ideas and thoughts of another person. So when you think about it, if you watch a whole movie, 2-hour movie, your summary is only going to be 1 or 2 minutes long, I hope, of the movie. Okay? The same thing when we take a passage of someone and we summarize in our own words, generally it's going to be shorter. It's going to only hit the salient, clear points. So I'm going to say this now, and I want you to understand it. When you summarize, you may not have to understand everything in that passage perfectly, but you have to understand the main ideas. This is going to be distinguished later from paraphrasing, where we in fact must understand everything 100%, or we're going to get ourselves in trouble. Okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to look at the example that I've given you here. And you can see the original example, and I want you to look at the summarized summary below it. So let me just read the beginning of that summary. In An Anthropologist on Mars, Sachs, 2003, notes that, and then we talk about what he notes. Now when we look at that example, what we can see is we use the title of the text, An Anthropologist on Mars, then we use the tag, Sachs Notes, and then we have the appropriate year, in this case, APA referencing. As soon as I write Sachs Notes, what does that tell my audience? That tells them what follows are not my ideas. They're going to be my words because I'm summarizing it. There's no quotation marks, but my reader knows that what follows is not mine. Now you can notice a little bit further on in that quotation, the writer also uses "as he points out." Okay? Now that's another tag. What I want you to observe about that is, if I take that tag out, as he points out, I take it out of that sentence, suddenly my reader might not realize that this is from another source. They might assume that I've read Osberger, that these are my thoughts on what Osberger is saying. But in fact, the "as he points out" refers back to the original author of the text we're looking at, Sachs. So when you summarize, you want to be very careful to make it clear what are my thoughts, what are my ideas, what are my opinions, and what are the primary writer I'm looking at. So use attributive tags. You don't need them every sentence, but you certainly need them whenever it might confuse your reader as to what are your thoughts, what are the original author's thoughts. And this is the most important part of summarizing, because the problem I see occurring is the longer the summary goes on, the more confusion it is about whose ideas are these. Your job as a writer is to distinguish between your thoughts and ideas and someone else's. It is not the job of the reader to figure that out. It's the job of the writer to make that very clear. Okay? So that's the primary thing that you want to know about summarizing in regards to plagiarizing. If you choose to paraphrase to integrate other people's words or ideas, it's important you understand the proper way to paraphrase. First question you have to ask yourself is, why would I choose to paraphrase? Most commonly, we're choosing difficult, technical, or jargon-filled writing, and we want to change it into writing that our audience will understand better. So we're going to restate or reword a passage. We're going to use different words, perhaps different sentence structure. We're going to have the same meaning, but we're going to have different words. That's essentially what paraphrasing is. I believe, though, that if you're going to paraphrase well, you have to understand 100% of what you're reading if you're going to paraphrase it in your own words appropriate to your audience. So I want to talk a little bit about that and make you understand that primarily paraphrasing must change both the words and the sentence structure. Students often just change some of the words or many of the words or most of the words, but the problem is it still is plagiarized because the form is not yours. And this is confusing for some of us. So I want to give an example to show this, to help us understand better the nature of paraphrasing. So if we look at the original text and we look at a plagiarized version, what do we see? Well, we see that the original text says in the 1950s. The plagiarized version, it says in the middle of the 20th century, which is perfectly fine. And it changes other words. It changes prisons to penal institutions, changes nurseries to places. It changes infants to babies, changes mothers to mom. It makes lots of changes, but it keeps the essential basic sentence pattern the exact same. What does that mean? That means a student could have gone into a thesaurus, hit the thesaurus button, and just arbitrarily changed all those words. The sentence is not yours. You cannot take credit for it. So if we're going to then have an appropriate paraphrase, what do we need to do? You can see the example here. We've got first a tag, according to Kelsey Kaufman. So right away, my readers know this is somebody else who's going to be giving us these ideas. So I do that. That's one change. The second change is, you'll notice in the original, prisons is the subject of the sentence. In this revised sentence, this paraphrased sentence, nurseries becomes the subject of the sentence. So we've changed it around. The third thing you should note is the first sentence, the original sentence was one sentence. This sentence is two sentences. So those are the three things the author has done. Added an attributive tag, put in a different sentence structure, and made it two sentences instead of one. Now some of you might be asking, but there's no reference here. There's no reference here because we have the tag, so we know who it is. We don't have a page number because we haven't quoted, we've paraphrased. So this makes it very, very clear. So when you paraphrase, you want to make sure you change some of the words and some of the sentence structure. I want to mention one more thing that this example helps us understand. You can see in the original version, the word nurseries is used. In the paraphrased but plagiarized version, the writer uses the word places. Now, although a nursery is a place is not necessarily a nursery. Okay? So now you've changed the meaning somewhat and you've caused some trouble. This is a good example where a key word should stay a key word. You do not have to change all of the words. You can just change some of the words. Okay? So again, final thing about paraphrasing, change some of the words, some of the syntax, and make sure you get a clear idea of what the writer is saying and you say it in your own words.